All right, everybody. So we're picking where we left off on the morning news. And in this episode, we're going to talk about a technique called text replacement. So if you look at the morning news, you can tell that this isn't text. And when I say that, meaning that's not actually HTML that has a style applied to it. What we're actually seeing here is an image that is replacing an HTML element. So the semantics are still there. There's still, say, an H1 element or some type of header or heading element. But then we can have any kind of font or any kind of stylistic logo that we want at the top without kind of sacrificing the underlying markup. So the way we accomplish this is, first we need to make sure that our markup is in order, and it should be. So right here you can see we have a header with an H1 element, the morning news, and if we look at that on a browser, we can see that this is just a plain old H1 element. And what we want to do is replace that H1 element with an image, but we still want the underlying HTML to reflect that the morning news is wrapped in an H1 tag. This is important for search engines, this is important for general web usability, and it's just good practice. So before we can go any further, we need to make an image to replace that H1 element with. And if we double check our CSS and we look at our main element, we can see that we have about 600 pixels to work with. So that's a good place to start. So let's jump into Photoshop and create a new document to do this header. So let's, 800 by 600 is fine. And just to make it a little bit easier to see, we'll apply a white background. Okay, so first things first is we need to pick a font. So this could go on all day. If we look at the morning news, I'm sure we could do some research and find out exactly what that font is. So let's just try to find something close, or maybe something not close at all. So let's take our text tool and just start with something. Okay, that's not bad. Let's see if we can make it any bolder. That's too bold. That looks pretty good. Let's just make it a little bit larger. Okay, so we have some text here, and I think we could actually make that even a little bigger. So let's go up to 72 points. All right, that's about right. All right, the other thing to notice about the morning news homepage is this top border, which is technically what looks like the top border of our little tag links here. But what really it is a part of this image that contains the morning news. That's the only way you can get that line behind the text like that. That's kind of how you know this has to be an image or not just plain old HTML, because that would be a really difficult effect to do without using an image. So we can replicate that line fairly easily. If we go back into Photoshop and let's just get the... Alright, so let's open up our inspector and our line tool, and let's create a 600 pixel line. So if we're going to start it at 100, I want to take this all the way to 600 pixels. There we go. Now let's move it in place. And if we select all, we can center all of our layers using the centering tools up here. And let's get this shape below our font. Go ahead and rasterize that layer. We're going to end up deleting some of it anyway. Oh, and deselect. So if we move that into place, and then make sure that shape has been rasterized so it's no longer a path, that it's just the pixels. And then grab your eraser tool and go ahead and take a little bit of that out of the background. And there we go, pretty close. So let's go ahead and give this a crop. I have my crop tool just set to a fixed width at 600, so I have it right on the nose. And we don't want a whole lot of extra padding around this, so we can crop it pretty close. And then once you have that, we can crop it even closer, so just below that G. Image, crop. Okay, so now we have our image file ready for image replacement. And because our site is going to have a white background, we can keep the white background in here. You could also do this as a transparent PNG file, and then it would just accept whatever background you place it on. But for right now, that's not really necessary. So now what we can do is we can save this for web. And we don't need to be a transparency. We can save it, and we want to make sure that we are in the right spot. Okay. So here's our week 1, the morning news, images, and we'll just call this tmn.png. Okay, so now we need to get that image to replace this text here. And what we don't want to do is place an image tag inside this H1. We could do that, and that's not really an appropriate way to do it. Plus, then we'd have to get rid of the text, and that's the whole reason to use image replacement, is so we can keep the text in place. So we're going to stay out of our markup for right now. We don't really need to do anything here. All we need to do is go into our CSS and apply some rules to this H1 tag. So if we go into our CSS and we find our H1 element, which I don't even think we have a style rule for. So what we're going to do is just do a header H1. So let's go here and make some rules for our header H1 tag. So the first thing we want to do is indent our text so we can actually indent our text so far that it will disappear off the page. So we do that using the text indent, and I usually just give it a really high negative value. So usually 9,000 pixels. That will usually suffice. So if we click back to our browser and refresh, we can see that that's gone away. So now this is where adding our image comes into play. So back to the code and back to our header H1, we need to add another property, and that's the background property. And the background property takes a few parameters, one of which is the URL. And the URL is going to be the path to our images file where that where the PNG file of the logo is, where it's saved. So all we have to do is place that path within the background, and we want to back out a directory, go into images, and then the morningnews.png. Okay, so I changed this to background image. You could do just background and apply the no repeats, and you'll get the same result. Basically, this is a shortcut property for using a bunch of other properties like background, repeat, background image, and such. So this is easier to do. So the next thing we have to do is this height, width, and height isn't quite right. So what we want to do now is set a width and height. Actually, we can leave the width alone, but what we want to do is set a height on this so that we see the entire morning news. And that's pretty close. And now, as you can see, our site is starting to look a little bit closer. I think maybe that font could have been a touch bigger, but looks like we might even want to do a small margin at the top as well. Whoops. There we go. Just bring it down a little bit. Okay, so that's essentially text replacement.